Music. Siddharth Bhatia and Vikram Sampath will discuss books, music, and books about music. Siddharth Bhatia is a journalist, columnist, and author, and has been a media maven for over 3.5 decades. He has worked with several Indian and international media companies and was the first Indian correspondent in South Africa, covering its historic transition to democracy in 93-94. He was among the founding editors of the Mumbai-based English daily DNA. Currently, he is a regular commentator on current affairs and popular culture in several publications such as Times of India, Asian Age, Mint, Hindustan Times, and also on national television. He is the author of 3 books, including Cinema Modern, The Navketan Story, Amar Akbar Anthony, and India Psychedelic, his latest book on the rocking generation. Vikram Sampath, he is a Bangalore-based historian and the author of 3 acclaimed works of non-fiction, Splendors of Royal Mysore, The Untold Story of the Wadeyars, My Name is Gohar Jan, The Life and Times of a Musician, and Voice of Veena, S. Balachandar, a biography. His book on Gohar Jan won him accolades including the prestigious Sahitya Academy's first Yuva Puraskar for English Literature and the ARSC International Award for Excellence in Historical Research in New York. He is an academic and visiting fellow at the Institute for Advanced Study Berlin and the University of Queensland, Australia. He currently serves as the director at the Indira Gandhi National Centre for the Arts, Southern Regional Centre. He serves in several government committees at the centre and in Karnataka, including the Prasar Bharati Committee, Sam Pitroda Committee on Archives, Karnataka Knowledge Commission, and Karnataka Tourism Vision Group. His love for music and his training in Carnatic vocals has led him to establish the Archive of Indian Music, the first digital sound archive for the country for gramophone recordings. He is the founder director of the Bangalore Literature Festival. And
this is a session without any moderators. Not a problem really, but both of us will talk respectively about our work. On the face of it, our work is very different. He's written about a singer who sang in the early part of the 20th century. She was a pioneer, she was a star. It's a marvelous book, wonderful gossip in it. And mine is about the 60s and 70s in India, Western music. Yet there are a lot of similarities, and those are the ones that we will want to explore today in terms of how one went about writing it, what did one want to say. I'm going to play some music samples, and Vikram says he's got some lovely music too. So without much ado, let's start.
Sure.
So Vikram, let me act as a moderator.
And I'll do that for you.
Yeah, so moderator at the moment. Quick question. How did you think of writing about somebody who vanished in the mists of time, and who you would have realized early on that it would be impossible to get archival material?
Yeah.
So question A, how did you think about it? Question B, how did you go about it?
Yeah. Thanks, Siddharth. A very good morning, friends. In all the best of traditions of Indian classical music, I think we have come on stage without preparation, and it's a lot of improvisation that we're going to do just as it happens probably in a classical music concert. To the question, my muse was this woman called Gohar Jan, the first Indian, the first woman of the subcontinent to record her voice on a gramophone disc in 1902. Today, playing back from a physical device is something that we take for granted. But then what were the processes, what was the difficulties that some of the early artists faced when it came to recording on a medium like the gramophone, which had come in from abroad? And what were the negotiations that the artists did? I think this forms the main part of my book, in addition to, of course, exploring this fascinating life of this woman. Now, most biographies, they say, start off as a love affair. There is a trigger to every biography, and unless I think you fall in love with your subject, it's almost impossible for you to invest that kind of emotional energy and time and all of that to chasing your love for a long, long time. So my, takeoff point when it came to Gauhar Jan was almost accidental. I found her sitting in the box files of the Mysore court, her letters which were there. She was a visiting musician at the Mysore Palace, and though she was from Calcutta, she was an Armenian Christian, born as Eileen Angelina Yobird, then converted to Islam and became Gauhar Jan, was in Banaras, then moved to Calcutta, was one of the most feisty and hedonistic artists of her times, commanding, a kind of fan following which very few artists of the time did. Her photographs would appear on matchboxes made in Austria, her picture postcards which went all over the country, and people actually, she became a style statement of sorts. People wore the kind of bangles that she wore, the kind of dresses that she wore. And then this woman suddenly dies in anonymity in Mysore, lonely and forlorn, with none by her bedside to shed tears for her. And accidentally, when I came across, her papers and her letters to the Maharaja's government there, something happened, and I thought I really needed to explore this person's, story. But there was absolutely nothing to fall back on. She was a tawaif, so a courtesan, so no legal heirs and no family to speak to. So it was literally like getting into a tunnel with no hope of light at the end of it. And I think that's one thing common to both our works, where we have started off on a journey being excited by a particular trigger, but then once I came to know about her, I literally chased her across the length and breadth of India, from Azamgarh, where she was born, to Banaras, to Rampur, to Darbhanga, to Calcutta, to Mysore, Bombay, Madras, all places where she spent sufficient time in her life. Spoke to old-timers, most of them had passed on, and most of the stories that, exist, especially when it comes to Indian classical music, is largely in the realm of gossips. There is really no documented history. So most of these old-timers were so taken in by her fair appearance because she was a foreigner, and say, "Itni safed uska chehra tha ki when she had pan, you could almost see the red juice going down her throat and so on, almost making her something like a water lizard rather than a human being." So these were details which one had to sift out and leave, and it was really like putting together, I think, pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, getting documents from Berlin, from the person who recorded her, the German expert. Then her mother was a great poet, and so her poetry in Urdu was something I managed to get in London, which had a lot of details of the biodata. A lot of these women of that century also fought legal cases. We talk of feminism today, but then many of these Devdasis and the Tawaifs of that time didn't take injustice lying down. And so most of them took it to courts. So even Gauhar had some very fiery court cases which she fought in her life. And all these became, the building blocks for my story as well. But I think coming to your story, we now, I think, traverse time zones from early 20th century to the 1960s and 70s, which is where your story is based. So was it a fixation with the time or the era that attracted you more, or was it the music, or both? And how did you balance the two?
I think you began by saying that you have to fall in love with somebody or something. And honestly, in my case, I was in love with my generation. And I like to think that these were seminal decades where many a fresh idea that we take for granted today, global as well as domestic, feminism, student violence, student riots, the idea of free self-expression by youngsters, and in fact the idea of the teenager. Where did the teenager spring from? So there is a small line in some book that I was researching, and it says, well, the teenager was invented in India in the 60s, and the credit goes to JS Magazine. Now, even if that's not true, but you certainly realize that the teenager came into their own, and we heard words like the generation gap for the first time. So it was the idea that the 70s were something special, the 60s were something special, and of course the country at that time. Imagine your own All India Radio, Akashvani, playing only Hindustani and Carnatic classical music from morning to evening.
And film music, perhaps.
No, much
not-
later. Not even film music. Film music was considered by the then Information and
yeah,
Broadcasting
Keskar,
Ministry, Mr. Keskar, as immoral.
Yeah.
You know, I might concede half a point to him on that, but you certainly do not stop it. So Western music was out of,
Yeah.
you know. So, but I was very fascinated by the idea that everything was shut, the economy was shut, you couldn't get goods, you couldn't get things, and yet ideas flowed in, you know, without hindrance, fashion, sensibilities, the rebellious streak. How did people here realize that this was the music that was being played elsewhere? So that, I was fascinated by that idea. I did mention it yesterday, it's there in the book also, that I wrote a long article on Led Zeppelin coming to Bombay, and that acted as a kind of a trigger to me. Interestingly, you say that research was very difficult because there was in my case, research was very difficult because of two reasons. One, nobody had archives and photographs. They all thought, you know, who cared? We just played, I mean, you know, nobody kept, and nobody was going around like this taking photographs all the time. So nobody had photographs, so very difficult to get. Imagine institutional memory also was very, very low. I went to various organizations, including ITC, to get some material on their, the sponsors, the show they sponsored. Never heard of it, never heard of it. No documents.
My God.
And it kept on getting very, very frustrating. But I think by and by, and the kindness of strangers, and one of the people I've thanked in my book, in the acknowledgements, is a man called Mark Zuckerberg, because without Facebook, this book wouldn't have happened so fast. You know, you found people online, you wrote to them, they said, what are you talking about? I played music 42 years ago. Yes, but please try to remember details, dates. They got very upset and obsessed with my obsession about dates. You know, I'm a nutcase for dates. They vanished all over the place. The one thing that happened to me over and over again, and that I cannot fathom why it happened, is people gave me one interview and after that stopped talking to me.
Okay.
That I can't understand why. There was this wonderful guy I tracked down in Australia, and he gave me a fascinating story. He was from Calcutta, an Anglo-Indian, and he said, you know, just when we were migrating to Australia in the 60s, our group got a letter from a company called Apple, which said, would you like to come to Rishikesh and meet these two musicians or three musicians and talk to them about what you have, because they may be interested in something that you do and maybe cut a record. And he was boarding the ship soon after. So, you know, and then I said, okay, send me a copy of the letter. And he just vanished. So those were some of the frustrations. Of course, the frustrations is what makes the project even that much more exciting. Challenging.
Yeah.
But this is not the kind of thing in which one has to interview so many people. Is something I'll be able to do so easily, etc. I think both of us have got some audiovisual.
Yeah.
I think this might be a good time to kind of just...
Yeah. I probably want to show, play the clip first. Yeah. So this is perhaps, this takes you back to about 110 years. I don't know how many of you caught that, but at the end of the clip, there was this loud and flirtatious announcement of, my name is Gauhar Jan. And that marked the end of most of the early recordings of Indian classical music, because I want the photo on, please. because though the recordings were actually made in India, the actual manufacture would be done in Hanover in Germany. So for the technician there, it was an anonymous voice. He would listen to the entire recording, identify the artist by this announcement, and then put labels on the multiple copies of the disc and send it back to India for sales. And also for those of you who thought the recording was loud and shrieky and shrill, there was a reason. I want the photograph. Yeah. Technology. Okay, while it comes, so this was the era of acoustic recording. It was called mechanical recording too, where there were no microphones like this to amplify your voice. So once the photograph comes, you'll see that that was Gauhar Jan in a makeshift rudimentary studio, just asked to hop onto a dining table or so along with her accompanist. And on the wall, you would see a horn that is fitted. And the singer had to crane his or her head into that horn and scream out as loudly as they could. And depending on how loudly you shouted, there would be a stylus on the other end which would vibrate and cut etches on a shellac disc. Now, Indian musicians, classical musicians especially, while singing, you know that they tend to move their heads and hands as the raga overtakes them. Now, that would spoil the quality of the acoustic energy going into the horn. So there would be two agents who would hold your hand, one who would hold your head and push you into that horn and ask you to bellow hard. So it really, it's mind-boggling to realize how some of these artists of that era who are entering this new medium actually managed to weather so many challenges. Also, all these gramophone recordings were only of 3 minutes duration. Yeah, there it is. And so that is the horn there. And all the accompanists too, naturally, they were not heard so much because they couldn't naturally be pushed into the horn. But this was also, these gramophone records were only of 3 minutes duration. And in that 3 minutes, you had to compress something as expansive as Indian classical music, which depends on improvisation, and hours on end you expand a raga. So it was almost like Pressy writing in literature. And truly to credit, what was fascinating, which I discovered in the course of my research, was when recording came to India, it was only women all over India who embraced it. Most of the men folk kept away from it. There were a lot of superstitions that did the rounds, that if you recorded into that evil English instrument, you're going to lose your voice, or the gods will be displeased. Much like, I think, the superstitions about photography, that your lifespan will come down if you get photographed. So it was truly, a tribute to the grit and ingenuity of some of these women, largely from the courtesan community. And this was across the board, north, south, east, west, who, despite all these inhibitions, all these logistic challenges of screaming into horns, compressing music, they actually went ahead and recorded it. Had they not done that, we would not have had the MP3 players today, which we can carry so easily and play all over the place. So I think when we speak about writing about music, I think this also gives us, to some extent, like you mentioned, your work talks also about the era in which the music played. All these biographies, all these music histories, I think it's a window to the time. We also get to know about the social and cultural milieu that existed then, and how that influenced the music and in turn got influenced by. So which I think is a more pertinent point, which in a way both of us do cover.
Yeah, well, my book is called The Story of a Rocking Generation, so that's very clear that it's a story which is much larger, which goes beyond. The music groups are important, but they are a device to enter the larger story. But while you were talking about the recording, it's struck me that 60 years after that, and that's when, because recording companies in India were just not interested in Western music played by Indians, Western music not going to sell, Indians not going to sell at all, they did not invest their best instrumentation, their best recording, etc. for these few records that were made. To think about it, that in the entire period from 63 to 76, which is more or less what I cover, all over India, there were groups all over India. And speaking of Armenians, there were Armenians, Jews, Parsis, Christians, Goans, Hindus, Muslims, everybody. The occasional Chinese. everybody took part, Punjabis, Sindhis, Gujaratis. So it's a sort of, in that sense, compared to your two, it's a story of some kind of cosmopolitanism. But all of these guys managed to cut between them barely 25 records. Those records are now in huge demand. I'm going to play some clips just to show how rudimentary the sound recording was. This, we are talking 60, 70 years later. In one particular case, there was a particular group called Human Bondage. They said, we are not good enough, we are never going to record. But they wanted to hear their own music. So they set up in somebody's house a makeshift studio. There was a curtain kept. Behind the curtain, a guy sat with those large spools. 3 or 4 mics were placed, and they recorded. I'm not going to play the whole clip today, and the clips are not available on the internet. But even then, you can make out how good. The instruments are perhaps Indian. The amplifiers, God alone knows. The recording, very poor. And even then, you can make out what high quality. So you think that had they got the opportunities, they would have been, if not international stars, certainly much better known in their own country also. So can we? This is a 4 or 5 minute presentation. Will give you a sense of the dreaded word. Somebody said to me yesterday, you did not use the word nostalgia. It's a dreaded word, but maybe nostalgia, a whiff of nostalgia might come in. Okay, so yes, next please. So it all started in October 1962. 4 boys from Liverpool. This was the first beat group in the world. Till then, singers sang songs written by somebody else. These guys wrote their own songs, they wrote their own music, and the group's composition, 3 guitarists and a drummer, and many of them singers, many of them songwriters, began with this. And this was how it all began. Please play. Thanks. So when this song played, actually it did not create a sensation all around the world. As it happens, it came on number 17 in the British charts and then slowly sank away. But this song was heard all over the world on radio stations. In Bombay, Bangalore, Calcutta, Madras, young boys and girls heard this song. They said, this is different from what my parents are listening to. What are my parents listening to? Frank Sinatra. I don't like it. What are they listening to? Maybe Elvis Presley. Okay. They're listening to jazz. I certainly don't like jazz. This was a rebellion against that. A lot of jazz lovers in the audience, I'm sure, but at that time, these youngsters said, we do not want to be singing like that. And so because this was more harmonious, this was more free-spirited. Jazz is also, but it has a different kind of vibe. In India, jazz, came and became an upper-class activity. It was a working-class music in America. So when this happened, it sent ripples all around the world. So 4 boys in Bangalore started it. Yesterday I promised that I'll show you the photograph. Here it is. Next. So have a look at these 4. One of them is still living in Bangalore. That's Ken. One unfortunately has passed away. I don't know the fate of Gautam. And in the middle is a young mop-top haircut Bidu. Bidu asked me, where did you get this photograph? I don't have it, but that's the beauty when you go around acting in your best beg, borrow, steal behavior. This is what turns up. So the Trojans were formed here, and immediately after, in Bombay, another group was formed. Next, the Jets. Please note the subtle changes that are going to happen now. People are wearing ties. The hair is a bit long, but it's clearly brushed, and it's clearly cut. And in the middle is Suresh Bhojwani, who got the very first Fender into this country. Nobody could get a guitar into this country. These are all handmade, made by somebody in Bombay, but that's a Fender, and that changed their sound. The duty on guitars, by the way, at that time was 350% of cost. So you can imagine what how much it must have cost. Next. In Calcutta, the first group that came up was the Cavaliers. They even had their own fan club. They even had their fan newsletter. Anyone from Calcutta here? Do you remember them at all? Have you ever heard of them? Okay. So let's listen to their music. The song is badly recorded. It's called... oldies, does it not remind you of Herman's Hermits? That kind of music? But there was a sitar in between. I think somebody was trying to be a little clever to say, let's give it an Indian vibe. Calcutta, things were happening. Calcutta always had had a fantastic tradition of Western music. The Anglo-Indians really contributed to the Park Street vibe. If you read a lot about the Park Street story, you'll realize that without the Anglo-Indians, it wouldn't have emerged. All these musicians were Anglo-Indians except for one, and that's Peter, who's an Armenian. Next. In Madras, anyone from Madras? Anyone remember Madras at that time? The Mustangs? So, if anyone can recognize this piece of music, I'll buy you a coffee outside. Anyone recognize this music? Anyone? No? So this is, they are playing a song called Escape by the Ventures. People say, Ventures? Who's the Ventures? Well, they were an instrumental group. Again, please check out their uniforms, check out their demeanor, check out their clothes, check out, most importantly, their haircuts. Their haircuts are going to undergo a slight shift soon. Next. Then you come to Bombay, the Savages. The Savages were mainly a cover band, did some of their own recordings, but what made them different was that they ended up cutting 2 albums, 2 full LPs, and a couple of singles. And one of their early singles was cut with a young teenager who came there on the recommendation of someone or the other, and they said, you know, she knows how to sing, use her. They said, yeah, we'll use her, and they used her. Her name was Asha Putli. So she's not there in this song, but you may recognize this song, especially the old style rebels among you. Thanks. Everyone knows this song, right? Steppenwolf, Born to be Free. They were, as I said, a cover band. I tried to find out what the royalty story was, and people were very iffy about it. This was, of course, by Polydor, so I suspect they did have the rights anyway, but nobody thought in terms of copyright and all that kind of thing in those days. Next. So, Simla Beat Contest became a huge hit. Bands from all over India were taking part in it. They cut these 1 or 2 records. And the finals were invariably held in Bombay. 5 years of Simla Beat Contest. The music is available on YouTube. Please listen to it. By now you must have realized the recording was fairly rudimentary. Next, please. So this was the Bible and kind of chronicler of that generation. Impossible to get old copies. Again, a problem with researchers, Vikram. Where do you get old copies from? So, friend of a friend of a friend, and then somebody in Delhi said, oh, by the way, I've just heard you're looking for JS copies. I have about 100. Would you like them? Here they are. One lives with the kindness of strangers, believe me. Next. So this was younger people, the iPod of that generation. You had to have it, only 425. You could take it on picnics. I'm sure you've realized what that is. That's the speaker. And this was with batteries. So you take it on a picnic. Does anyone go on picnics anymore? I'm not sure. When I was preparing this, I showed it to my teenage daughter, and she said, look, I realize that you've got to talk about the past, but please don't be prehistoric, because this is really ridiculous. Okay, next. The jetliners came to Bombay from Ceylon, and the first disco was set up in the Taj, blow up. Again, a small aside here, went to the Taj and said, do you have photographs of the blow up? And they said, what is blow up? So,
I'm afraid we'll run out of time, so we'll have to go into questions.
okay, I'm really sorry. Just a couple of slides. Coming up next. So I'll just play Human Bondage and then after that. Next one. Yeah, please play this. Recorded in the worst kind of, there was a demand, what could I do? Oh, not playing. Sorry, did not play. There's a conspiracy here against human bondage. So, anyway, please put this off. Please put up the slide. So again, rudimentary recordings, very poor archiving, and but how do you still want to write? So how do you write it? So you broaden the story.
I think we are in a minority, the kind of genre of music writing. When we talk of writing about music, I think it encompasses a very wide kind of a domain. One is, of course, historical writing, biographies, etc., which have some of this kind of challenge. When it comes to Indian music, I think there's also a whole lot of musicological literature that gets written, very seldom read, where, the Shuddha Rishabh to the Gandhar to the Madhyam and how the oscillation happens. There are a lot of books written, and when you talk of writing on music, it is largely that in India. It's the whole genre of music history and music biographies is very, I think it's about 10-15 years young. Because I think there was also a kind of a disdain that even practitioners of music, particularly Indian classical music, looked down upon the whole idea of documentation, because this was an oral tradition. Even the music transmitted from teacher to taught. I remember my own music lessons, my teacher never allowed me to record them on any device. It had to be internalized by repeating several times. And today we have our classes on Skype. So it is a shift in just about 10-15 years, in terms of the technology. So the disdain that one had for putting things down, I think that led to a loss of a whole lot of stories, and artists' lives are full of fascinating details. And it would make for a wonderful book, and I don't know why these don't get written.
No, but I'd just like to end on this note, is that I wonder whether people are keeping archives today.
I don't think so.
That's a real tragedy to me, because people think of what they're doing at that very moment as something so casual, and of course people get busy and all that kind of thing. But wouldn't it be marvelous to have, recordings of or pictures of people recording and all that? By the way, I must just tell you, I was with the recordist of the film industry, somebody who knew him, and I said, he's recorded everyone from Lata Mangeshkar downwards. Does he have any photographs? And they said they had no photographs.
For that, we'll probably have to fall back on Anusha and her Indian Memory Project, which will probably give us a lot of interesting photographs and also stories.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can we take questions from the audience, please?
Sure. Please go
Would
ahead.
anyone like to ask
Any questions?
any questions?
Incidentally, that audiovisual, in case anyone wants to see it later, I have it, so please.
I'm interested in how did music change dance in both cases?
Music change
Dance.
I do cover that in my book as well, because the early part of the 20th century, there was this vicious campaign that was launched against performing women, which manifested itself in the form of the anti-notch campaign. And in those days, especially Indian classical music and dance went hand in hand. They never operated in silos. So a Tavayaf or a Devadasi learned to dance as well as sing, and most of it was done together. Like in a mujra, it would be Baithi Mehfil, where people would actually also improvise on the bhav, bol banao thomris and all of that. So this whole campaign where they were demonized and much like what happens now against certain communities, this whole ostracization, which led to the abolition of the Devdasi system and the Tavaif system, where they were branded as common prostitutes. That I think had tumultuous effect on the music and art scene of India, which is sadly, it's gone undocumented largely. And 1900 to 1950, I think those were the periods that defined what we know today of as Indian music and dance. Because a Bharatnatyam or a Kathak was very different from what it was 100 years ago. So this whole campaign actually led to two branches. One is it made music and dance go separate. If you were a musician, you seldom danced and vice versa. And also the dance itself, both the art forms went through a long period of sanitization. The music in those days was highly erotic, where in true Indian tradition, it was not considered to be immoral to actually be sensuous. And I think the thumris, the padams, the javalis, which were sung by both North Indian and South Indian artists, laid a lot of stress on eroticism. Now this had to actually, now the music had to come to the middle class homes. People like you and I had to learn this music, so to make it safe for us. So a lot of the compositions started getting sanitized and made safe, so to say, for people to learn. Similarly in dance, people like Rukmini Devi, Arundale and others who defined a completely new idiom for Bharatnatyam and Kathak up north, where there too the sensuality aspect of the art was completely taken off, and art somehow took this whole path of being only divine, which was not the original character of Indian art. The sensuous existed with divinity, and most often the lines were blurred. But I think from the 1940s and 50s, which I think in a way adds to what you say, it was a definition of a new country. And the arts needed to be this medium through which a people who had never thought of as one country or one people, they needed a sense of self-identity and esteem, and it was the arts which gave that definition, so to say. So you had to have one which was applicable for the largest possible denominator, and so that was, I think, how things got defined. Long answer to your short question.
Just adding a line. Apparently, like most of the courtesans and the Devdasis and Taifs entered film. So the generations of them, like during that time.
So I'm just grabbing the mic since it's next to me. Yeah. Actually, it was kind of interesting too, because yesterday in the session on publishing, it became clear how commercial and how market-oriented publishing is, and how publishers have to fight, in a sense, to keep their eye on content. And this is somehow very refreshing that, of course, people wanted to make money and there's the commercial aspect, but it seemed more passion-driven or more interest-driven. It's just a comment.
Thank you. Question to begin with, and in my experience, I have read and seen a lot of books on Miles Davis and Count Basie and Jimi Hendrix and Morrison and so on and so forth. You can, if you travel outside of India, you can see a lot of these books. And I think what you gentlemen have strived is a very good beginning for all of us to know more about Indian music. Because particularly when we talk about Indian music, the one that we have are typically technical based. We talk about ragas and talas and rhythms and everything. And for you particularly to choose an obscure topic such as the jazz musicians or the rock musicians who were not so much in the limelight, it's a very interesting topic. And I would surely like to buy your books and read them. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Guru. We wish the music track on Human Bondage played because
It's around, it's around.
yeah, no, but the music didn't play. I think a personal observation, I don't know if you're going to agree with it. First off, I'd like to pay a tribute to Nandu Bende, who was with Human Bondage. He unfortunately passed away a couple of weeks ago. Would you agree that Human Bondage in 1974 is possibly the reason the Bombay independent music industry stands where it is today?
Yeah, if you allow me a minute, firstly, Nandu was not part of Bondage, but they were two boys from Bangalore and two from Madras, the Shottam brothers and two others. And then those people, they were together in some other group, and then the Ramesh and Suresh, Radha, Babu Xavier, all Bangalore boys, started Human Bondage. So Human Bondage, I took a survey from the peers, and each one of them said that that was the group they aspired to because of their technically perfect playing. And for them to think that they can never record because they were not good enough speaks for something. So, you know, I would think that Human Bondage, there's a story in the book about, I think Plant or Page asking Suresh to hand over his old guitar to him because he found him so good. But Suresh saying, no, this is my baby or something like that. So they were the pioneers. Pity is I keep trying to tell them to come together to at least record, but everyone's got on with their lives.
The
Oh God, that
restaurants
question
in
dogs
Pan-
me everywhere I go.
Yes. How is it? Because look at all the people who were involved.
Okay,
the
so-
musicians who were involved. I grew up on Park Street at that time. We
So,
were in
ma'am,
Loreto House
yesterday-
in college. That was so much a part of
Yesterday
me.
somebody berated me outside by saying, do not ever use the word crooner again. Singers, Park Street singers, Usha, Pam. Usha is mentioned, Pam is mentioned, but my story was about beat groups. It was not about these individuals. Ajit Singh is not in the book. I didn't want to go all over the place. And it really, I mean, there was somebody whom I interviewed, very famous in Madras and Bangalore in those days, called Ernest Ignatius. I interviewed him, but I just couldn't include him because it would not be fair. So, except for one solitary singer, that's Asha Putli, whose story itself is so fascinating. And I thought I would rediscover Asha, and I'm happy to say that she's being kind of talked about now a bit. But I had to be very, very tightly focused. So there is a book, there is a film, there is a feature on Usha out there, but I'm not the person to do it.
We'll just take one last question.
I once heard a recording of what sounded like 1960s or 1970s Konkani rock band, which was completely mind-blowing, and I've been searching for it ever since, and I've not been able to find it again. So any clues you can give on that would be...
You know, there were a lot of these. I mean, there is a story about a Bengali rock band, and today the language rock band scene is exploded. There is Raghu Dikshit, there is Avial in Kerala, there is Chandrabindu. So today it's exploded. At that time, I have not heard of this particular band, but I'm sure there were.
And yeah, just more generally, I mean, I do feel like I'm very interested in the history of Indian rock, but there's also kind of in English publishing like an Anglophile bias on the English-speaking bands, and then towards classical music also, because it's sort of, you know, sellable internationally perhaps, or like to a high-class thing here.
Really?
I don't know. California?
International.
But I'm just wondering about like the more folkish or local musicians, like is there anybody documenting that stuff, the older?
I'm sure there's a lot going on. You know, it's amazing things are happening out there. So something will emerge. Before you know it, I constantly get calls from people to say, have you touched upon this? Or if you haven't, do you have any material left over? So I'm sure there is a lot going on. What is interesting, and that is something that fascinates me, Vikram is somebody who did it before I did it, is chronicling your cultural history in the broader context. So, and you draw bigger stories out of that. So the very fact that it's happening is, I think, very, very encouraging.